Donovan Mitchell to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Wow, oh wow, big blockbuster in the NBA this weekend. We'll talk about how it impacts the Pacers today, plus more Russell Westbrook potential trade thoughts for the Pacers and a FIBA roundup. Lots of news for the Pacers and international play. We'll get to it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News, and today, diving into the latest news around the NBA, around the Pacers when it comes to trades, roster tweaks, and FIBA play. First up, I'm way late to this because I was gone all weekend at a bachelor party. Apologize for my deathly look if you're on YouTube. Donovan Mitchell to the Cavs. Huge trade. I'm way behind on covering this. Huge trade in the Pacers division. Big move there. How does that impact the Pacers this year and beyond? What does it mean for how they should play in their own team building? I think there's some pretty significant ripple effects there as the Jazz and Cavs make a huge swap. We'll talk about that today. Plus, we got more Russell Westbrook, Pacers tidbits from Mike Scotto of Hoops Hype. Talk a little bit about that and more about that potential deal. And at the end, we'll talk about FIBA play. Lots of news and stuff to cover from Pacers players playing overseas. Some injuries, some fights, and some good games from Pacers players. Let's dive right in, though, starting with the big news from last week. I'm way late to this, but hey, better late than never, am I right? Donovan Mitchell from the Jazz to the Cavs. Unfortunately, wasn't able to cover this yesterday because, again, I was in the middle of nowhere. But either way, big trade. Donovan Mitchell to the Cavs. Ochai Agbaji, Colin Sexton, Lauri Markkanen, 3 unprotected first-round picks, 2 pick swaps to the Jazz. Wow. Great work from Utah to get unprotected picks, an ex-lottery pick. Just some good stuff for them, quite frankly. I'm very impressed with the way they handled this offseason between getting off of Gobert and Mitchell in the way that they were ultimately able to do so. Impressive stuff. Obviously, great work by the Cavs to get a star. You should always do that, especially at the point of the rebuild they are in. I love this trade for both teams, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the Indiana Pacers, and the most direct ripple effect is, of course, that the Pacers division is insane. The Pacers division is just absolutely ridiculous. The Bucks have pummeled the Pacers for the last almost half decade now, essentially. With Giannis, he does not project to leave. They still have Chris Middleton. They still have Drew Holiday. The Cavs now have an all-star center in Jared Allen, an all-star point guard in Darius Garland, an all-star shooting guard in Donovan Mitchell, and of course the ascending, soon-to-be super-duper star Evan Mobley. They're going to be nasty. The Bulls have 2 all-stars. The Pistons have the first overall pick from 2 years ago in Cade Cunningham, as well as Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duran, a bunch of other nice pieces. Wowie, the Central Division is insane. The Pacers will have no easy time playing those teams 4 times a year for a while. It's going to be interesting to see if the timing works out where the Pacers' ascent and peak can come, maybe as the Bucks' decline finally starts and the Bulls transition to their next era, and maybe they'll just be on the timeline of the Pistons instead of these other teams. The Cavs timeline, a little too early to say, but at least 3 years on the Mitchell deal, plus whatever they have of Garland and Mobley, and I mean, the Central Division is nuts. The Pacers will have to deal with that for years. That will be very challenging for them in the win-loss department because the Central Division, this might be the best total talent ever in the Central Division. Maybe there are some times in the 90s, obviously, when the Pacers, Bulls, Pistons, and Cavs were all pretty good all at the same time, but this is close. This is really, really good division. The Pacers don't have to deal with it every way, and that's why I think my biggest takeaway from this is the Cavs traded 3 unprotected firsts. They had to wait because they have a pick coming out to the Pacers. So 2025, 27, 29, I believe, are the years. 3 unprotected firsts. So from an actual trade perspective beyond the basketball court, where the Pacers will be playing against these teams for a long time, I think this is why I view it as important to get more assets and get more unprotected picks at every turn, because that was a big turning point, at least per some of the reports here, is the importance of the unprotections of those picks going from the Cavs to the Jazz. Protected picks, not as sexy or important in these deals for the receiving team. Unprotected picks, yeehaw. If that team tanks away by the end of this, or maybe Garland or Mobley end up somewhere else, or Allen has to go somewhere else, or the salary cap dictates they need to make moves, then all of a sudden those picks look a lot better, and there's nothing the Cavs can do about it because of the protections. I think that was the big swing thing for the Jazz for the Cavs. Well, both really, that ultimately got this done. And so getting as many assets as possible that makes it either okay to trade an unprotected pick because you're not as scared, or to have more unprotected picks to trade because they're valuable, I think are a key thing for the Pacers to learn here, both as they are mentioned in discussions with a certain Western Conference team about picks and protections and things like that in a trade for star, and for themselves to consider both in trades in the future and in trades for their own guys. Unprotected picks are mega valuable. Mega valuable. You never know what can happen. You should always push for no protections, because that was huge for the Cavs and the Jazz in this instance, and really the elephant in the room, the Knicks as well. The Knicks on draft night started with pick 11, did some dancing, trading Kemba, some other seconds to get 3 other firsts for their current first, but those 3 firsts were protected. They had protection. So it sounds awesome to say the Knicks can trade a bajillion picks for whoever's available or whatever they want, but if those picks aren't as good as unprotected picks, that's not necessarily better. And this is all going off of reporting. I don't know directly what any front office is thinking, but that makes a lot of sense to me, at least, how you'd view this from a value perspective, especially in a bigger market versus a smaller market. Things like that play in. Good work by the Jazz and good work by the Cavs, really, to be in the position to be able to do this. Good drafting and good trades by them set this up, and now we're here. This will be a good litmus test for the Pacers, too, looking at this Cavs team now, right? They are currently an all-star point guard, an all-star shooting guard, an all-star center, and an ascending young center. All that to say, they have okay wings, but they're mostly a guard big team, as the Pacers have been for years. Can this work, right? And obviously the Pacers would like to get a wing as they get better and stuff like that, but, currently constructed, Halliburton, Duarte, Jackson, Smith, maybe, whatever you want to call the Pacers' best 4 young players, they're guards and bigs, right? Can the Cavs be awesome? Can they be a top 4 seed in the East at some point? That'll be a good litmus test for the Pacers to know, can what they're doing right now work if they do struggle to pick up a wing on the way through their rebuild. And maybe the Cavs will be aggressive in getting a wing themselves. They still have some draft capital, young players, and tradable assets in general. But just in general, can stud guards and bigs with few wings work? I think that's something the Pacers can try to learn from the Cavs. And the Pacers kind of tried it themselves, right? Brogdon, Oladipo, Turner, and Sabonis looked pretty good for the small amount of time they actually had all 4 of those players available at the same time. And then they, ended up pivoting to LeVert and changing things that didn't work as well and were worse fitting pieces. But in general, it kind of worked for them. They were looking like a dangerous team. They made the postseason as a top 4 seed at one point. So perhaps this could be like the ultimate test in Cleveland, where all 4 of those guys are all-stars with no wings is a stretch. But with few wings, does that work? And can the Pacers learn anything from that? We will see. Another very, very direct thing that I somehow haven't talked about for the first 8 minutes of this podcast is the Cavs. The Pacers own their pick in this coming draft, right? It's protected for the lottery, like last year, where the Pacers ended up not getting it because the Cavs fell out of the playoffs in the play-in tournament, kept their own pick at 14, which, hey, became very important in making this trade ultimately happen. So maybe that domino effect will work out for the Pacers, but I would say this obviously makes the Cavs pick worse. It's going to likely be a worse pick than it was if they didn't make this trade. Right now it'll be in the 20s if things go well or according to plan. But it's more likely the Pacers actually get it. Right? It's more likely the Pacers actually receive that first-round pick from the Pacers, and thus making the Caris LeVert trade. Caris LeVert for Andrew Nembhard, whoever they get with that pick. That looks pretty good if that pick turns out okay. We'll ultimately see where it shakes out. LeVert obviously had run his course with the Pacers at that time. We'll see where that ends up. But this does increase the chances of the Pacers now having 3 picks next year, their own, Boston's and Cleveland's. So if you're a Pacers fan, your rooting interest this year is, of course, whatever you want the Pacers to do. And then you also want the Cavs and Celtics to be like the 5 and 6 seeds in the East, because that way they're guaranteed in the playoffs, but they have the worst record possible. That way that it shakes the Pacers' way. That's unlikely, but it's possible, right? The Celtics were like 500 after half their games last season, and the Cavs, it's still kind of TBD, even though it looks like they'll be really good. So I suppose that's possible. I'd rank it pretty unlikely, but hey, you never know. The last thing I want to talk about with this Donovan Mitchell trade and its impact on the Pacers is the value of a star as an entrance or exit has become a little more obvious this summer, right? Teams have sort of shifted their attention to getting back, some key role-playing pieces and picks to mostly just like, we want picks. Unprotected picks are now more valuable. So if the Pacers their current iteration of young talent doesn't end up fitting in the future, or it does really fit and they need to trade for the next piece, the value of what that is, it's looking like several unprotected picks is what teams are angling for now, as opposed to younger players at times, or as opposed to some of those valuable role players, as we saw the Rockets, for example, get Oladipo in the Harden deal, or whatever you want to look at. There's a lot of ways to skin the cat, and there's no perfect way to trade every time, but I think teams are sort of starting to look at unprotected picks as having more value, and so I think the Pacers now know, okay, if they need to trade for a star in the future, or they need to get a lot of value for their own star in the future, this is what it's going to take, or this is what it's going to look like, and that's always important. Every team will look at every trade as a value test for their own franchise. Big trade, we'll see the long-term implications, obviously, as time goes on, but when it's a team right in your division, if you're the Pacers, you see them 4 times a year. Obviously, it's a big deal, especially when you own their draft capital this coming season. Of course, this will be something to monitor the Cavs' record this entire season. What a trade. I really thought that was awesome to see a team like the Cavs, who are young and ascending, go for it like that. Speaking of trades, Russell Westbrook rumored for the Pacers back in the spotlight, especially as some updated stuff for the Lakers has happened. The updated stuff for the Jazz has happened. It's all happening in the NBA. We'll talk about that coming up here on Locked On Pacers. Before we do that, though, really quick, let me talk to you guys about the best tasting protein bars on the market. Built Bar, if you have not tried them yet, you absolutely have to. Best protein bars out there, 100% covered in chocolate, delicious protein bars. They basically taste like a candy bar, and they have these puff varieties that have marshmallow infusions right in them. And there's a new flavor, indulgent cookie dough, covered in chocolate, cookie dough chunks right in there, and that puff variety right inside. It's amazing. The enjoyment of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it, and it's healthy for you. This cookie dough chunk puff has 160 calories and a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. Run to Built.com, snag a box for yourself. They also have a ton of other awesome flavors. I love the peanut butter brownie. It's collagen protein. Your body absorbs it super fast, so healthy, delicious, good for you, good meal replacement or snack, however you want to do it. You got to try them. Go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKEDON15. That's a new code if you've been using it before, LOCKEDON15. You'll get 15% off your order. You can do that as much as you want. Promo code LOCKEDON15 for 15% off at Built.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Hey, for your second listen, this is easy. Locked On Cavs. Hear all the latest and greatest from Evan Dammarell and Chris Manning about Donovan Mitchell in Cleveland in the Central Division, and that team on the rise. Dang, are they going to be fun to watch this coming season. Let's talk about a different star trade. Russell Westbrook covered this a little bit last week, but there's been a little more since then. I talked to the Locked On Lakers guys since then. You should hop on over to Locked On Lakers to hear me there. And I just want to talk about this more often because I don't think you can talk about a topic like this with so many layers too much. I don't want to beat a dead horse. I will try not to repeat anything I said last week, but there's a lot of layers to this. And look, I think that the big takeaway here, and I'll talk about this at the beginning and end of this segment, is look back at the Mitchell trade to talk about why I think the protections, and why I've been stating since July talking about this, that the most important thing for the Pacers in this trade is protections on the picks. Their goal should be unprotected first-round picks. If they can get both unprotected, awesome. If they can get one unprotected, maybe negotiate a little, take Turner out, make something else in. Whatever it takes, unprotected is what the Pacers should want from the Lakers because those picks have mega value. They could be anything. Even if they stink, you can figure out in a few years how to flip it again. It just has so much value when there's no top X protection on it. I think that's very important to think about in the context of these trade. Mike Scotto, awesome reporter. He's been on the show before. Best accent in the reporting game, heavy Brooklyn accent. I absolutely love it. Reported on Hoops Hype over the weekend. One of the early trade talks between the Pacers and Lakers, per Scotto's sources, was that the Pacers wanted to do Buddy Hield and Miles Turner and Daniel Tice and his money to the Lakers for 2 first-round picks and Talen Horton-Tucker to go on top of Russell Westbrook. So first of all, look, hey, for the Pacers, absolutely start this way. Boom, go for the moon. That's how negotiating works. And hey, Russ makes no sense for the Pacers. They don't have to trade Turner or Hield to get this value. Might as well go for everything. They've always valued Turner highly, right? Why not go for everything? That makes a lot of sense to me. Get off Tice's money. All these layers make sense to me as a negotiating standpoint for the Pacers. So let's cut through it. First of all, this is no longer a possible trade, right? Talen Horton-Tucker is now on the Utah Jazz. He was traded for Patrick Beverley. Obviously, if the Lakers thought he was a key piece or the last hurdle required to get off of Russell Westbrook or do this Pacers trade, they wouldn't have done that. I don't think it's a sticking point. I don't think it kills the deal, but I do think it's noteworthy that he was in this and he is now no longer an option. The second thing, Daniel Theis, interestingly, he can be officially aggregated in any trade to any team 3 days from now. The 9th of September is the date that can happen, 2 months after the initial trade with the Celtics on July 9th. That would be Friday. But in theory, technically, he could be traded to the Lakers in a deal where the Lakers are taking back less money than they're sending out, even if there's a lot more pieces in the trade. Trade rules are very confusing. He technically wouldn't be aggregated in that case. It's not worth getting into the full rules of it. So it's not like that's a hurdle timing-wise, but getting Tyson there, get off his money for the Pacers, why not? Only 2 more guaranteed years there, but he's not has a ton of value for them. They have other young bigs. They have Miles Turner. They have other forwards who can play the 5. Yeah, again, this makes all sense for the Pacers to me as little tiny ways to change up the trade. That said, Theis's inclusion is really interesting to me. Obviously, a smart idea for the Pacers if possible. Getting more flexibility is always good. It's not like they have a huge need to clear space next year or anything like that, though. If you can trade Theis away and it doesn't alter the deal too much, yeah, they should do that. But if it, for example, sacrifices pick protections, right? If this is, I think, kind of my thesis of this segment. If including Theis means the Lakers go from top 3 protected to top 5, don't do it. That's not worth it to me. It's not like the opportunity cost is super high for the Pacers with their cap space next year. They're going to have a good amount unless something changes in the coming weeks or at the trade deadline. So it's not a huge deal to me that they would have his money on the books next year. Who cares? It's only like $10 million. They're going to have space anyway. You shouldn't be desperate to get off of him if it sacrifices the assets or alters them in a significant way. Now, if it doesn't, and again, always start by asking for the moon, then great, yeah, ask for the moon. Try to get off of this guy. The Lakers don't have a need for a center, but that's not the point. It's just about getting off his money, mostly if you're the Pacers. Yeah, go for it. But, hey, I think that makes a lot of sense. I also think the Talen Horton-Tucker thing is interesting for the Pacers as a young team. It would have been hard to get him on the court as a player. They have a lot of guards and wings already, but he did have a talented year for the Lakers. Another flyer is always good. He's only really young, lower 20s in age still, and he played with Halliburton for a year at Iowa State. So in terms of a person fit, as a player fit, as a culture fit with what the Pacers are doing right now in terms of youth and asset accumulation, it makes a lot of sense even if he might not be a talented player. So I think from a starting point, this makes a lot of sense even if it's not something that really makes sense for the Lakers to do. But hey, if you're the Pacers, you have to start at that stage. Now, to me, let's go back to what we just talked about in the first segment, right? The Jazz trade. The big swing thing, like I said, or as has been reported, is or has been these protections, right? The protections you've seen helped the Cavs hurt, air quotes, the Knicks in this example, where they weren't willing, or doesn't sound like at least they were willing to give up as many unprotected picks as possible. That should be the goal. Like I said at the beginning, the Pacers should be looking to get unprotected picks in this. If it means Theis has to stay with the Pacers, if it means like, I don't even seen TJ McConnell's name in this, but as another salary piece, if it means he's not in the deal, that I think for the Pacers you have to say, that's fine. I think unprotected is so valuable to get that you've got to start thinking in those terms if you're the Pacers, and I think they already are. They obviously would be trying to get as much as they can, but seeing it happen, over the weekend, the value of those picks, even in 2029. I've heard a lot of fans say something like, those picks are so far away, they have less value. I totally disagree with that, first of all, just in principle. But as a whole, because they're unprotected, even so far out in the future, they still can be valuable. Teams change so much in the NBA. You have to absolutely go. And if including Theis or McConnell and viewing them as negative assets financially, I don't think that's the best way to maximize your assets as the Pacers. Getting the best pick possible is the best way to maximize your assets. There's no need to include those guys at this stage. Maybe if you're desperate for space in the future, you give up like something minor to get off of those picks. You don't want to hurt the good things you can get just to include them. I think the Pacers' goal should be get as good as picks as possible if they're going to do something like this. If they're going, and I've seen some people also call this helping the Lakers. I don't view it as that at all. This isn't helping the Lakers. If the Pacers get 2 awesome picks, that's helping the Pacers, right? That's helping the Pacers. Obviously, the Lakers get better, so sure. I suppose that's the case, but every trade is helping both teams, or else why would both of them do it? To me, this is about the Pacers maximizing their current cap space, getting assets for their players that may not have as much value to them as other teams, and just being opportunistic in a good moment. And I think being opportunistic means getting unprotected picks that either can be valuable draft assets when the time comes, can be valuable in trades when your team is at your peak, or just getting the right stuff for your rebuild. So to me still, I'll reiterate what I said on Thursday beyond the unprotections. The way this sounds like it's trending in terms of what one team, the Lakers, wants and what the other team, the Pacers, want, from a value perspective, from a money perspective, from a willing to trade perspective, to me it seems like the landing spot could be Westbrook and a lightly protected first for Hield. No Turner, no 2 first-rounders for the Lakers. Both teams, the Lakers save a bunch of money. They get a better fitting player. They don't have to deal with the Russ stuff all year. The Pacers get a first for their cap space. They still keep Turner and can view his positive value throughout the season. But we'll see, right? The Lakers obviously want both players for a reason. They obviously want to keep as much as they can and keep protections on them. The Pacers want unprotected and to keep their valuable players. We'll see where the negotiations end, but that's what makes sense to me. That's what makes sense to me from a protection standpoint. But I get why, especially as we get closer to camp and this stuff becomes less likely, where this is heading. I don't want to beat a dead horse too much, so likely won't talk too much more about that unless more details come out about a deal. Thank you, Mike Scotto, for your excellent reporting. As usual, you can hear more about that on Hoops Hype. Jovan Buha, I believe, joined him on that show. I've seen a lot of those quotes typed out and aggregated in other places. Last thing for today, FIBA play. Been raging like crazy from a Pacers perspective. Between qualifying action for FIBA play next year, as well as Eurobasket running from September 1st to September 18th. A lot of Pacers action going on. And some of it is not on the court, which is not necessarily a good thing to hear as a fan of the team. Let's talk about that. Before we do that, though, let me talk to you guys again about the good folks over at Built Bar. Like I said earlier, they make the best tasting protein bars ever. I've had a lot of protein bars that I buy in the store that are like way too chewy or don't actually taste like the flavor the box says, or really just aren't that good. The texture doesn't make sense. Built Bar solves all those problems. They're 100% covered in chocolate protein bars that taste like a candy bar. I'm not just saying that. I mean that. They're the best protein bars I've ever had. I buy them myself all the time. The cookie dough chunk ones are amazing. The peanut butter brownie ones are amazing. Tons of listeners have tried them and told me that they love them, or asked me about their other products that I haven't had as much of on Built's website. They sell more than just protein bars, which you can see on their website, but you have absolutely got to try them. If you go to Built.com, their new flavor is a cookie dough puff chunk. So it's got little cookie dough chunks in it on the top and some marshmallow infusion in there, as well as that chocolate flavor. It's super good, super healthy, 160 calories, 15 grams of collagen protein. It is fantastic. Your body absorbs the protein really quickly. They're healthy, they're good for you. Tons of other awesome flavors on their website, plus a mixed package with their most popular flavors. You just got to try them. Go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKEDON15. That's a new code if you've been using the old one for a while, to get 15% off your order. That promo code again is LOCKEDON15 for 15% off at Built.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Lakers is the way to go. I was on there last week. They're covering that Lakers team with lots of stories and crazy good players. And LeBron James, very well. The Kamenetsky twins kill it over there. Let's talk about some FIBA play. I previewed this action a little bit for you a couple weeks ago here on Locked On Pacers. The Americas part of this is wrapped up. So USA's done mostly. Canada's done mostly. There's still some games going on, but not a part of qualifying play. And I believe the two Pacers inclusions in FIBA play on the Americas qualifying side for World Cup play next year are done. That's Chris Duarte and Buddy Hield, who both played. Duarte and the DR, they went 1-1 in their two games. And Chris Duarte, first of all, go read Kalen Cooper and Indy Corners writing about Chris Duarte and his play in Summer League and FIBA play. Fantastic stuff. Duarte ends up averaging 15.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists for the DR in those two games. Really struggled with his shot, especially from the outside, which is interesting to see as he's more of a primary in these settings. And 12 turnovers. This is something Kalen wrote about a little bit as well. I was actually pretty impressed with Duarte's Summer League handle, right? Like he definitely had a tighter handle. He had that same sort of growth as O'Shea Brissett, right? When he looks like the adult in the room, he could kind of skate right by guys. But as kind of a lead primary creator, as he has to handle the ball a lot, he's still kind of overwhelmed. 12 turnovers in two games for the DR, something he's got to work on. I think he's still kind of in this secondary creator role. That's fine. He's a really good shooter. I still think at his best he'll be a 3-and-D type player. But as he kind of grows in this creator role, he's still working through some of the kinks there. I think that showed. His performances were fine, but still some stuff just to monitor going forward. Buddy Hield for the Bahamas. Some of that well-rounded Buddy Hield game that we saw after he was traded to the Pacers popped up. They went 0-2, not the most talented team, but he had 14.5 points per game, 6.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, solid all around. Really interesting to see those second two numbers continue to stay up high after he played very well for the Pacers in those two categories. So his inside shot wasn't there, still shot pretty well from deep as Buddy Hield does. Something he'll have to work on in general. High turnovers for him as well, over 10 in the two games. So, out of Sacramento, I think we see from him kind of a theme. And we'll have to see if this carries into the season. I think I'll talk about this on his season preview podcast, probably next week. But out of Sacramento, he's kind of shown he's got this nice, well-rounded-ish game, especially offensively, that can be kind of a secondary guy. Maybe not on the best teams in the league, but on okay teams. But not a great tertiary guy, off the ball running around like that. But he cannot necessarily be a primary. He can't lead second units as a creator. He's not quite that level of passer and game reader. So good quality scorer, has the outside shot, has some skills there, but not quite all together there. Oshae Brissett on Canada did not play. He's got some family stuff. Scott Agnes reports, so nothing to talk about with him. Canada, one of the better teams on this side of the pond. They won all of their games, but Oshae Brissett did not play. Scott Agnes has more in Fieldhouse Files on Substack if you would like to read more. Daniel Theis, let's go over to Europe. They had FIBA qualifying play, then a tiny little break, immediately into Eurobasket. Huge competition. Eurobasket is over in Europe. Daniel Theis, after a little bit of concern if he'd be playing or not after an injury, he is playing for Germany. So first of all, good news for the Pacers to see. They'll be happy that Daniel Theis is playing and healthy enough to play. That bodes well for his potential availability early in the season, whether that's in camp or whatever. So playing after an injury is great. Germany killing it, 3-0, looking very likely to qualify for the knockout stage that starts next week, early next week. Germany is 3-0. He's averaging, played in all three games, 7 points, 5.7 rebounds so far per game for Tyson. He just thrives kind of in this kind of enforcer role, this more. It's hard to just, you have to just watch Eurobasket if you haven't. These games are just like more intense and full of contact that goes uncalled. It's the same sport obviously, but like it's played a little differently in a way that is really enjoyable. And some of these post players can have a good time playing in this. We'll talk about Goga in a second, who also played very well. But like Jusuf Nurkic is killing it for Bosnia, for example. Valanciunas, Sabonis, they do very well in these settings. Eurobasket is awesome. And Theis looks pretty good on this Germany team that's having a wonderful tournament so far. Dennis Schroeder, still unsigned, by the way, having a wonderful time for that German team as well. And Goga Bitadze, we have a lot to talk about here with Goga. In the FIBA qualifiers, looked pretty solid, 14.5 and 10.5 for the Georgian team. Double-double, very good there. If you want to read more about Goga playing for Georgia, his thoughts on Georgia being one of the host countries for Eurobasket, and playing well in those two FIBA qualifier games for the World Cup next year, I have a story up on Forbes that you can read. I wrote it at the end of last month, right before I departed, so couldn't plug it too much on this show, but I think it's pretty good. He talked about the Pacers, on how he perceives they will play this year, how he wants to grow this year, where he wants to kind of fit in on this new look squad. So I have a story. I would love if you all would read that. Played well in his first game in Eurobasket as Turkey lost to Belgium in overtime in that first game. 14-9 was a plus on the court. But right at the end, bad news for the Pacers. The same thing they had to worry about with Theis. He rolls his ankle. Does not play in the overtime. Then they play Spain in their second game. He plays a little less than 7 minutes and did not play in their third game. The head coach for Georgia, or the Georgian team, a press officer for Georgia, not their head coach, said that Goga, quote, he feels a little pain right now. He's not practicing with the team, but doctors hope he will be ready for the game. We'll see. That was before the Spain game. He did play in that game for a little bit, but not the whole game, and then did not play in their second. So he tweaks the ankle. He comes out of the game. He comes in with 55 seconds left, and then that's it, and then barely plays against Spain, and then does not play in their third game against Turkey. So obviously interesting to monitor how that turns out for him, because, of course, he's dealt with poorly timed injuries basically his whole career. So this happening to him is obviously a bummer. Doesn't play against Turkey, but still the Turkish game ends up so far being the biggest story for him in all of Eurobasket. So for those unaware of what happened in this game, Georgia defeats Turkey, their first win in the event. Furkan Korkmaz, 76ers wing, playing for Turkey, of course, getting into it with some players during the game, and He gets ejected. Korkmaz gets ejected. There's a video I saw from someone from this game of fans throwing stuff on the floor. There's a video that I'm looking at right now of cups being thrown on the court as Korkmaz is ejected. So that's just subtext. He got ejected. It is what it is. But apparently, per a lot of reporting here, a couple Georgian players actually got in a fight with Korkmaz as in the back hallways of the game, one of those players being Goga Bitadze. Details still a little unclear on his actual, like how much he was involved. It sounds like one player was the main instigator here, but a fight is obviously never good. We'll see if there's any suspensions from the Eurobasket staff or anything like that, or what this means for Goga or anything like that. But yikes, not good. Not good at all. Fights obviously very, very bad. We'll see if this has any ramifications on Bitadze's availability, his health status, things like that. John Hollinger, former Grizzlies front office exec, now on the writing and podcasting side for The Athletic and other places, tweeted as follows. I'll just read it verbatim. Try to find a precedent to see if NBA suspension possible for Bitadze and not seeing one. In previous FIBA fights of yore, NBA didn't suspend Nenad Kristic when he hit an opponent with a chair, Thon Maker for flying Bruce Lee impersonation, or Nick Batum for a blatant nut punch. So, possible this has no impact on Bitadze in the NBA, but we will see. I mean, two NBA players getting in a tussle, or perhaps way worse than that if this is this bad of a story. Never good. We will see where this lands in coming days as more details are released and his involvement is sort of revealed a little more. But that, not good. Not good at all to ever see players get in any sort of fight, and who knows what Korkmaz was saying or doing as well. I'm not saying anyone in this is innocent or guilty of anything, because I don't know any of the details, but just going off of the reporting, this is something to monitor with Goga. He was playing well pre-injury and sort of looking like a slightly improved player at a key time for him in his career. So it'll be very interesting to monitor, see what it means for him, what it means for the Pacers, if anything, and if he's able to continue playing as he fights through this injury in Eurobasket. For more on that, I'll probably talk about Eurobasket now, again, once it's over. Tice and Bitadze's team still playing for at least the rest of this week. Competition's got about 2 more weeks left, a little less than that. If you're interested in watching any of those games, a lot of them are on ESPN+. That's all for today's show. Super awesome show. I really like talking about a lot of these topics. The rest of this week, we'll do 2 more episodes for player season previews. We started off with Jalen Smith yesterday. I'll probably do Chris Duarte later this week, and then the first bench group, I'll do 3-in-1 show for the bench forwards. And then as of now, I think the other show I'll do this week is something I've wanted to do all offseason, doing tier lists for every player on the roster on who fits the best to worst with Tyrese Haliburton on this Pacers team. If anything happens in terms of Kendall Brown signings, Exhibit 10 deals, roster tweaks, those obviously will supersede any other topic. But for now, that is our tentative schedule for the rest of the week. So stay tuned for those sort of shows. Hope you guys had a great long weekend if you did. If you didn't, I hope you had a great, fun, and safe weekend. We'll be back tomorrow. Until then, have a great day.